In true crime stories, one thing we often notice is that familicides usually happen in families that seemed perfect from the outside. Time and time again, we've seen cases like this, and today's story is no different. The world was shocked because nobody could believe the reason behind it, or even that it could happen at all.
He was very hidden, very silent, and so nobody could be blamed for thinking that he was this good man, a caring man, a trusted man, that anybody who wanted anything done to go to.
On the morning of August 29th, 2016, Mary grew worried when her daughter Clodagh, aged 39, didn't drop off her two youngest sons, Niall, aged 11, and Ryan, aged 6, as planned. She tried calling Clodagh and her husband Alan, but got no answer and no replies to her texts. Growing more concerned, Mary drove to their home in Oakdean Downs, Barani. When she arrived, she saw both family cars in the driveway and the curtains drawn tight in the living room and bedrooms, something unusual for Clodagh. She wouldn't just disappear without telling her mom. At first, Mary feared her daughter and grandchildren might have fallen victim to carbon monoxide poisoning. But when Mary tried the back door with her key, she saw a note taped inside. It said not to enter and to call the police right away. That's when Mary knew something terrible had happened.
On 29th August 2016, we lost our daughter and sister Clodagh and her lovely sons Liam, Niall and Ryan in the most horrific circumstances. They were savagely and brutally killed by Alan Hawe in a premeditated and calculated manner.
But before we dive into the shocking and heartbreaking details of the crime, let's first get to know the Hawe family. For starters, Alan and Clodagh Hawe were far from just any ordinary couple. They were deeply devoted educators who poured their hearts and souls not only into their teaching careers, but also into the close-knit communities they belonged to. Alan Hawe, a native of Windgap, a small rural village in County Kilkenny, held the respected role of deputy principal at Castle Rahan National School near Barone, where the Hawe family lived. Windgap, like much of Kilkenny, is known for its strong sense of tradition and community spirit, values that clearly influenced Alan's dedication both at work and at home. Clodagh, on the other hand, came from Mount Nugent, a peaceful village in the southern part of County Cavan, just a short distance from the small towns of Baljugan and James Duff. Mount Nugent, surrounded by rolling green hills and quiet country roads, is a place where neighbors know each other by name and community ties run deep. Much like Alan, Clodagh was a passionate and committed educator, teaching at Orristown National School, located southeast of Kells in County Meath. Together, Alan and Clodagh raised 3 sons, Liam, 13 years old, Niall, 11, and Ryan, 6, 3 vibrant boys full of energy, curiosity, and the boundless potential that every parent dreams of. Their lives reflected the very essence of a loving Irish family, grounded in community values, hard work, and simple joys. Now, it's important to understand that crimes of such magnitude were relatively rare in the Irish communities where the Hawes lived. Ireland, especially in smaller towns and villages like Barone and Mount Nugent, has historically enjoyed lower crime rates compared to larger cities. These communities are often characterized by close bonds, where neighbors look out for one another and children grow up playing safely in the streets. But perhaps, as Clodagh's sister Jacqueline would later reveal in a heartbreaking interview, there were signs all along, subtle, easy to miss, and painfully easy to ignore.
That murder letter was full of lies, and it was, as Professor David Wilson says, has given in the Serious Crime Review, there was pseudo-altruistic comments in that he was leading people to believe certain things even when he knew that he wouldn't be around to answer for them.
Let's rewind the story, not to the moment of tragedy, but to the beginning. Because to truly understand the horror of what unfolded, we need to understand how Alan and Clodagh came to be, and what may have been hiding in the shadows all along. Clodagh was born in 1977. From a young age, she stood out, not for being loud or attention-seeking, but for her quiet intelligence, deep empathy, and maturity beyond her years. Her mother, Mary, described her as a dream child, polite, responsible, and focused. She was the kind of daughter who made life easier for everyone around her. She excelled in her studies and formed strong friendships that lasted into adulthood. After completing her leaving certificate, she enrolled at St. Patrick's College to pursue a career in teaching. It was there, during her very first year, that she met Alan Hawe. Their meeting happened on Valentine's night, something that might seem romantic at first glance, but in hindsight marked the beginning of a relationship that would gradually pull Clodagh away from her independent self. Alan, who was a year ahead of her, lived in the student residences. He came across as disciplined, serious, and principled. They quickly became inseparable. But from early on, those closest to Clodagh noticed subtle changes. She stopped going out as often. She began distancing herself from her friends. Alan didn't drink alcohol, and soon Clodagh gave it up too. Little by little, her world began revolving around him. Jacqueline, Clodagh's sister, recalled a telling moment that stood out. The family had gone shopping for bridesmaid dresses for Clodagh's upcoming wedding. Jacqueline had a strange feeling Alan might show up, even though this was a day for the women. Sure enough, he did. When Jacqueline suggested that she and Clodagh finish the shopping on their own, Alan insisted on staying. It was a small thing, easily brushed off, but Jacqueline never forgot it. The couple eventually married, and from the outside, it was a beautiful union. But there were moments, even at the wedding, that left Clodagh's family uneasy. Clodagh's mother, Mary, for instance, was sidelined when it came time to walk her daughter down the aisle. Alan did it instead. Mary admitted later that she felt a little overlooked, even hurt, but quickly brushed the feeling aside. What mattered most to her was that Clodagh was happy, and oh, she was. The couple was deeply in love, the kind that radiates through shared smiles and wordless glances. Alan held her hand with pride, with purpose. Their journey together was just beginning. Their first child, a beautiful boy they named Liam, was born in the year 2003. From the moment he arrived, everyone said he was his mother's image, not just in appearance but in spirit. Liam was quiet, kind-hearted, and always had a calming presence, even as a toddler. As he grew, so did his passions. By the age of 13, in the year 2016, he had become an impressive basketball player, towering for his age, with a soft touch on the keys of a piano that melted hearts. He had a confidence blooming quietly, and he was well liked by his classmates, not for being loud or flashy, but for his kindness and grounded nature. 2 years after Liam's birth in 2005, their second son arrived. They named him Niall. If Liam was the calm, gentle wave, Niall was the still pond, peaceful, introspective, and perfectly content in his own world. He could sit for hours with his beloved Lego sets, constructing intricate cities, ships, and castles with the precision of a young architect. He devoured books, especially those written by David Walliams, and he found great joy watching the Great British Bake Off. With a twinkle in his eye and dreams written across his little face, he often declared he would one day own a bakery and make cakes for everyone he loved. Then, in the year 2010, came the youngest, Ryan, the baby of the family, affectionately nicknamed Ryan the Rebel, had a spark and energy all his own. Mischievous and bold, he often led his brothers into harmless trouble, and yet, like Niall, he adored Lego and could build for hours if only someone gave him space to dream. He was the whirlwind that brought laughter and life into every room. The dynamic of the Hawe family, Alan, Clodagh, and their 3 boys, was, on the surface, something to admire. They did everything together. Outside of their work and the boys' school lives, they were inseparable. Clodagh family, however, began to notice how rarely they got to see her alone. If Mary or her sister Jacqueline popped by for a cup of tea and a quiet chat, Alan would always be there, sitting silently at the kitchen table, not speaking much, but never leaving either. It became a silent pattern. There were no moments with just Clodagh, no private talks, no mother-daughter afternoons. But even with this fact, they were the ideal family to the outside world. I mean, they are respected, religious, and active in their community. Alan, especially, was perceived as a pillar of the town. He attended Mass every Sunday, volunteered often, and was always ready to shake a hand or offer help. It was a picture-perfect family life on the outside, but everything was quietly unraveling beneath the surface, and no one in the community truly realized how deep the cracks ran until that Sunday evening, the 28th of August, 2016. That night, the whole family stopped by Clodagh's mother Mary's house after returning from a holiday trip. Liam had played a basketball match in Virginia earlier that day, so they dropped in to visit Mary before heading home. Around 7 o'clock in the evening, the adults gathered around the kitchen table, sipping tea and nibbling on biscuits, while the boys lounged in the living room watching television. Everything seemed perfectly normal to Mary, except one detail lingered like a dark cloud. Alan seemed deeply anxious about returning to work. He even voiced it aloud, saying he didn't want to go back. He'd been involved in unresolved conflict with a colleague before the summer holidays, something that clearly still weighed on him. What the family would painfully learn later, through notes left behind and reports from a counselor, was far more disturbing than they could have imagined. Alan had reportedly been caught masturbating inappropriately and had watched pornography on a school-issued laptop, one he never brought home. Although the school's representative would later claim no evidence of inappropriate material was found, the damage was already done, at least in Alan's mind. His shame and fear of exposure had started to spiral. That Sunday night, around 9 o'clock, Clodagh reminded Alan that they needed to leave. Little Ryan had to get his bath before bed. The plan was that Mary would look after Niall and Ryan the next day, while Clodagh, Alan, and Liam went back to school. Mary hugged each of them tightly and told them she loved them, never knowing it would be the last time she'd see any of them alive. The following morning, Mary waited for Clodagh to drop the boys off, but they didn't arrive. Mary began to pace, glancing at the clock, wondering why Clodagh hadn't called. She always called, even if she were just 5 minutes late. Mary called Clodagh's phone. No answer. She tried the house phone. Nothing. Then she tried Alan's number. Still nothing. She texted them both. No reply. A heavy knot formed in her stomach. She knew something wasn't right. In a panic, she jumped into her car and drove the short distance, just 5 kilometers, to the family's home, but it felt like the longest, most agonizing journey of her life. When she arrived, the sight of both family cars in the driveway and the curtains drawn sent chills through her. She had a key to the back door, and as she approached, she saw a note taped to the glass. In Alan's handwriting, it read, "Don't come in. Call the Gardaí." Mary fled to the road, her hands trembling so badly she dropped her phone. It took her nearly 10 tries to dial the emergency number. When she finally got through, she reported what she'd found. Then she ran to her neighbor Edie's house, terrified and breathless, telling her that she feared Alan had done something horrific to Clodagh and the boys. Together they returned to the house and waited for the police. The first officers on the scene, Garda Aisling Walsh and Garda Alan Ratcliffe, asked the women to return to the neighbor's home and wait there. A short while later, they broke the devastating news. 5 bodies had been found inside and that no one had survived. The horror was only just beginning to unfold. Clodagh's sister Jacqueline, who was already en route to visit her mother, began receiving devastating news alerts on her phone. 5 found dead in Cavan. The full horror would later come out in the inquest. Clodagh was the first to die. She had been online browsing holiday packages, sipping a cup of tea when Alan came up behind her. Without warning, he struck her in the head with an axe he'd taken from the shed and then stabbed her in the back. She tried to defend herself, raising her hands, and he nearly severed one. He killed her with a level of rage and violence that stunned investigators, using 2 weapons as if consumed by hate. After murdering his wife, Alan calmly left the knife and axe beside the couch, sat down and began writing a letter, 5 full pages in total. In it, he poured out his emotions, talking about his shame and the storm he believed was coming. He assured the family that they had all been happy, despite what he was about to do. Then he walked upstairs to the bedroom shared by Liam and Niall. He crept over to Liam's bed, knelt on his chest, and slit his throat to silence him before he could scream. Niall, however, did try to fight back. His hands bore the marks of defensive wounds, but Alan killed him too. Finally, he went into little Ryan's room. Ryan was a small, gentle boy, fragile even for a 6-year-old. He didn't stand a chance. After killing his youngest son, Alan placed the knife on Ryan's pillow and gently pulled the duvet over his body, just as he had done with his older brothers. With his family gone, Alan returned downstairs, wrote more of his twisted letter, and around 2:30 in the morning, transferred €2,000 from the joint bank account to his own. He wasn't finished. He laid out Clodagh's jewelry on the bed, writing that it should go to her mother, Mary. He included photographs, money boxes, and even the tin used to collect football club fees. He left instructions about the mortgage, bank statements, and which brother should get his new car. He urged his siblings not to make the same mistakes he had and begged them not to forgive him. He didn't want a Catholic burial. He wanted to be cremated and his ashes scattered in the sea. Once everything was in place, Alan hanged himself in the hallway. In his final words, he confessed that he had been caught red-handed, referring to the disturbing behavior noted by the counselor. He had also been in touch with the Irish National Teachers Organization, though the family never found out whether he was seeking help or legal defense. In his letter, he expressed his belief that Clodagh didn't know what he had done and that it would be kinder to kill her than let her live with the shame of who he was. He believed he had ruined all their lives and that everything would explode once he returned to school. But the explosion never came, at least not publicly. The school claimed there had been no issues and have never once reached out to the grieving family, not on a personal nor a professional level. In interviews, Mary and Jacqueline later said it was whispered that Alan may have worn Clodagh's underwear in secret, another hidden truth that Clodagh might never have known. One revelation that has continued to haunt the family is Jacqueline's statement that Alan Hawe's counselor allegedly knew far more than what was ever revealed to the public. Crucially, the counselor's detailed notes that could hold vital insight into Alan's mental state and intentions, have never been released. To this day, they remain hidden from the family, guarded behind privacy regulations and red tape. Jacqueline also recalled that a local man came forward with a chilling account. He told her that in the early hours of Monday morning, August 29th, the same day the bodies were discovered, he saw Alan Hawe driving near Castle Rayhan School. The man wasn't alone. He was with someone else who also witnessed the same thing. Disturbed by what he saw, he went straight to the Gardaí and made a formal statement. But when the Hawe family later inquired about this crucial piece of information, they were told it may have simply been a case of mistaken identity. This explanation didn't sit right with them. To Jacqueline and her family, the pieces painted a far darker picture. It appeared as though Alan had returned to the school in the dead of night, likely to destroy or tamper with evidence on his work laptop, perhaps to delete files, cover his tracks, or eliminate digital fingerprints that could reveal more about his mindset or plans. It felt to them like a deliberate, calculated move. In fact, counselor records noted that 97% of the pornographic material Alan Hawe viewed was accessed through the school laptop. That figure alone sparked immense concern. The Hawe family formally requested access to the full file from the Gardaí, only to be flatly denied. Even after the inquest, after the media frenzy and the formal findings, the family was left with gaping holes in the narrative, critical questions left unanswered. Adding to their frustration was the way information was trickled out to them. Jacqueline has said the family was drip-fed by authorities. Often they learned new developments through the media before the Gardaí would confirm or deny anything. Imagine losing your sister and nephews in the most brutal way possible, only to be kept in the dark, forced to piece together the truth through news snippets and speculation. The inquest itself, intended to provide closure and clarity, was instead described by the Hawe family as a disaster. They felt re-traumatized, unheard, and sidelined. Alan Hawe's medical and counseling records were brought into the inquest, and Professor Harry Kennedy, a consultant forensic psychiatrist and the director of the Central Mental Hospital, presented an assessment of Hawe's mental state, based solely on those records. According to Kennedy's analysis, Alan Hawe suffered from depression that escalated into psychosis. This mental unraveling, he claimed, led to the murder of Clodagh and their 3 sons. But Jacqueline wasn't buying it. She was horrified at how an expert could sit in a courtroom, never once speaking to Alan, and declare him psychotic based purely on paper trails and second-hand reports.
Myself and my mum were nearly investigators ourselves. We would have the family liaison officer come. We would get certain information. Did we ask questions? Did we know what A, B or C meant from his counsellor notes maybe? And then we would be trying to find answers. It was very much a coroner-led investigation, but the why in the investigation wasn't accounted for, but it was accounted for then in the inquest, with the state employing Harry Kennedy to give the why.
Indeed, Alan Hawe's final letter read, "If it is any consolation, we were happy. Clodagh was happy. The boys were happy." Those aren't words typically associated with someone in the throes of severe depression or psychosis. And it wasn't just his final letter that contradicted the narrative. Hawe had seen his GP regularly over 5 years, and she never diagnosed him with depression. Nor did she know he was seeing a counselor. He was never off work due to illness, never showed visible signs of mental distress, and continued to uphold his duties as vice principal, a role of significant responsibility. He was active in the community, regularly attended GAA football events, and was viewed as a stable and involved family man. Strangely, Alan stopped attending his counseling sessions 2 months before the murders. Why? Jacqueline and her family can't help but wonder, was that the point when he began formulating his plan? Around that same time, another disturbing detail emerged. Alan had moved a couch in their living room, a piece of furniture that hadn't budged in 12 years. It was relocated from a side wall to directly in front of the fireplace, with its back facing the room's entrance. Was this part of a premeditated layout to conceal his presence and launch a surprise attack on Clodagh? The setup would have given him the perfect vantage point, hidden, waiting. And then came the bitter legal aftermath. Because Alan was the last to die, having taken his own life after murdering his family, he was still considered the legal heir to the estate. This meant that the property, the family home, would pass to his next of kin. For Clodagh's family, it was unbearable. They wanted the house gone. They didn't want to profit. They didn't want compensation. They wanted the place where their loved ones were butchered to be demolished. They envisioned a garden of remembrance built in its place, something beautiful to honor the lives lost, rather than a grim reminder of horror. But Irish law, rooted in outdated statutes dating back to 1965, meant that the family had to fight in court to stop the murderer's family from inheriting the property. It was, as Jacqueline put it, a final insult. Eventually, the two families reached a difficult but necessary agreement. A planning application was submitted to have the house demolished. Jacqueline promised she would be there the day it happened. As of the most recent updates, the house still stands, a haunting reminder its demolition postponed but not forgotten. Then came another heartbreaking decision. Still reeling from the unimaginable tragedy, Clodaugh's family initially agreed that Alan would be laid to rest alongside Clodaugh and their 3 sons in the family plot. In their shock, they were simply trying to make sense of the impossible. But as time passed, the unbearable truth settled in. They could no longer endure the idea of him lying beside the family he destroyed. Since Clodaugh's family had no legal authority to act, they reached out to the Hawe family, and to their credit, they agreed. In May of 2017, Alan Hawe's body was exhumed and cremated. The inquest stretched across 2 harrowing days. The final verdict? Alan Hawe was found to have unlawfully killed Clodaugh, his wife and his sons Liam, Niall, and Ryan, before dying by suicide. Clodaugh's surviving family has never stopped fighting for the full truth. They've long insisted that a psychological autopsy should have been conducted, something that could have reconstructed the final days before the tragedy and examined Alan Hawe's mental state with expert precision. To them, understanding his intent wasn't just a legal matter, it was a vital piece of healing, but instead they were met with silence. No one asked them what they had seen behind closed doors. No one asked them what it was like to live alongside Alan. Jacqueline later voiced what had haunted them for years, saying, "Alan was so manipulative. He only ever showed people what he wanted them to see. Only we know how unhinged he really was. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He could fill a room with unease just by standing silently in a doorway. He'd seize control of everyday routines, whether it was redoing the laundry to suit his impossible standards or stepping in mid-meal to fix something he thought wasn't done right. These weren't quirks. They were red flags of coercive control. But the law failed them. Under the Coroner's Act, the investigation could only address the what, where, how, and who, not the why. If the family wanted to contest the findings or seek a deeper understanding, they'd have to hire an independent expert from outside of Ireland. Financially, that was out of reach. A serious crime review was eventually carried out and shown privately to Clodaugh's family. But despite repeated pleas, the Department of Justice has refused to release it publicly. The answers the family craves remain locked away, while their grief plays out in the open. Mary and Jacqueline never intended to step into the spotlight. They wanted to grieve in peace. But when no one in power would listen, they spoke out, and Ireland began to listen. Support has grown, but the fight is far from over. More than 60,000 euros have been raised in Clodaugh's memory for Women's Aid, giving women a lifeline to escape abusive relationships. Her name now lives on at Orristown National School in a newly dedicated hall. A tree planted by Liam's schoolmates sways quietly in the breeze, a symbol of love, remembrance, and all that was lost. Each of Clodaugh's boys had a bright path ahead. Liam, studious and focused, would almost certainly be in college today, shaping his future with purpose. Niall was the dreamer, the one with creativity brimming in his every word and drawing. And Ryan, just 6 years old, was the life of every room, a little rebel with a megawatt smile. They were more than victims. They were individuals bursting with potential, stolen too soon. Every year, the anniversary mass overflows with mourners. The silence speaks volumes. Their absence still echoes louder than words. And in the midst of that mourning, one truth remains. They are still deeply, painfully missed. It's also worth pausing to acknowledge the pain of the Hawe family. They lost not only grandchildren, but a son. Their grief is complex, pierced by guilt, confusion, and the burden of having loved the man who committed the unthinkable. They believe Alan's actions stemmed from severe depression, a diagnosis that offers them some form of explanation, if not peace. And if holding on to that belief helps them get through the day, who are we to judge? Grief doesn't follow rules. It just asks us to survive it. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think there were signs of abuse happening behind closed doors? Subtle, quiet control that went unnoticed for too long? Or do you believe everything seemed perfect until Alan finally snapped? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've made it this far, be sure to check out this next video. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you once again for watching.